svima. Drago mi što ste došli i voljela bi da svi poželimo dobrodošlicu našoj autorici Karolini Ramqvist. Welcome, Karolina, to Zagreb.
Thank you. We've been talking Swedish now. I was about to say tack in Swedish, only since we've been speaking in Swedish now for a bit.
Mislim da je puno, I think it's better for our audience to speak in English and for me. Nakon našeg gostovanja na sajmu knjige u Puli, došli smo joj predstaviti knjigu Žena Medvjed u Zagreb. Knjiga Žena Medvjed je dio serijala Nadilaženje granica ženskih glasovi europske književnosti. Već je neko vrijeme na tržištu u prodaji i već je zapravo dobio dosta i preporuka i recenzija. Knjiga je prisutna u svim knjižarama i drago nam je da je evo sad nakon nekoliko mjeseci autorica došla u Zagreb. S nama je svakako i Lana Momirski, prevoditeljica knjige. A ja sam Ivana Glavaš, Bakija, glavna urednica Illyrice. Mogu reći da prilikom odabira naslova za ovaj serijal pročitala sam samo jedan kratki isječak na engleskom jeziku. Jako me se dojmio i osjetila sam da je to neko pravo pisanje, sve mi je bilo logično i onako baš mi je sjedalo. Onda smo urednica i ja pripremale nekakvu brošuru i morali smo sve knjige počitati od početka do kraja da bismo točno znali o čemu se radi, da bismo odredili naslovnice. I tad sam ja zaključila da je ovo meni najbolja knjiga iz serijala, meni osobno najdraža. I pročitala sam na engleskom jeziku i onda sam sad imala priliku ponovno pročitati na hrvatskom jeziku. Jer je urednica knjige bila Elizabeta Vrbančić koja je s nama danas ovdje u publici. Jedan pljesak za Elizabetu. I to je zapravo opet jedno prekrasno iskustvo. Lana, hvala ti. Zaista je, prijevod je prekrasan. I na engleskom jeziku je krasan, nisam čitala na švedskom, ali bilo mi je zaista novo iskustvo čitati to na hrvatskom jeziku i to je zapravo samo jedan od dokaza koliko je važno da je taj prijevod zaista dobar i napisan u duhu hrvatskog jezika. Voljela bih započeti danas ovu priču sa jednim citatom iz romana. I will start with a quote from the book. Mm-hmm. Krajnje je neobično čuti da je žena izvršila kakvo dobro djelo, te smatram da onaj tko za takvo čuje ne smije isto djelo zatajiti, već ga zapisati zlatnim slovima, kako bi se gospe ugledale na nj, a muškarci mu se divili kad u slabijem spolu vide nešto što nikako ne može biti slabost. To me navodi da vam ispričam što sam čuo od kapetana Robertvala i više njegovih kompanjona. Dakle, sjajan uvod da potakne sve moguće rasprave i sve naše frustracije da izbiju van, da se pobunimo protiv takvog tretmana. I to je upravo, ovo je uvod iz jednog od tekstova, uvod koji kaže jedan od likova, muških naravno, iz jednog od tekstova koji su zapisani o glavnoj junakinji Margareti Navarskoj. Postojale su samo 3 izvora koje je uspjela autorica Karolina Ramqvist pronaći o toj povijesnoj junakinji. Mnogi od nas već znaju o čemu se radi. Dakle, Margareti Navarskoj je u 16. stoljeću sa svojim skrbnikom otišla zajedno sa francuskim kolonizatorima u kanadske krajeve, te na brodu se dogodila nekakva afera i bila je izbačena na otok, dakle napušteni otok usred hladnog Atlantika i bila je kažnjena za svoje nemoralno ponašanje. O njoj se zapravo u povijesti, dakle, nema dovoljno izvora o njoj, osim ta 3 teksta. I ona je, čim je jednom čula za priču o Margareti Navarskoj, postala, dakle, opsjednuta njome. A zašto? Zato što je ta žena pronađena nakon 2 godine živa I ona je preživjela tu veliku, mislim, avanturu samo usred hladnog Atlantika i njezina priča nije bila ispričana. Karolina, why did you get obsessed with this Marguerite de la Roque? Why did you want her story to be heard or told?
I think that is probably one of the questions that is in the book. Why do I want to tell her story? Because there were so many. I mean, the reason why I actually started to write the book was that I discovered the sources. There are 3 French Renaissance texts that sort of form the basis of our knowledge today that this woman, Marguerite de la Roque, actually did exist, and what happened to her actually did happen. And I was initially supposed to write a treatment for a feature film. And once I got into the research and actually found these French Renaissance texts, I realized that I had to write a book, and it was quite disappointing in a sense because I had been so relieved that for once I found a subject that was not going to be a book, it was only going to be a movie. And then realizing that there was something very textual about her story. It has a lot to do with literacy and literature. And also these texts are produced in the late 16th century. All of them, I think, are written in the 1570s. And so they are all consumed with this newfound love for the printed word and books, which is a novelty at the time, right? So for me, it became evident that I too had to write a book. And when you do write books, you never really know why. It's like, I think you have all these different motifs. And I did know that the 3 people who had written about her during her own time, they had their own motives for doing that. And that was one of the things that interested me. There was this queen, Margareti de Navarre, who was the sister of François I, the French king. And she wrote about Marguerite de la Roque, probably for some kind of religious reasons, but also maybe like proto-feminist reasons, wanting to write about a woman who achieved something exceptional. Then there was André Touvet, who was the cartographer to the king, and he was also an explorer, even though at the time he had never left France, but he considered himself to be an explorer, and he produced these huge works. I think there are about 2,000 pages maybe of pictures of animals and fantasy creatures and faraway places that he will both imagine and sort of research about. So he used the story of Marguerite for reasons, in order to know more about the so-called New World that he wanted to explore. And then the third person was a French-Italian writer called François de Belforêt, and he wrote a short story, a novella. And the novella was this experimental new genre at the time, and in it he included a song that draws from this story. So I was very preoccupied with their reasons for writing about her and what reasons they had to write about her in certain manners and to omit certain facts and include others. And probably my own question of why I wanted to write about her was part of the reason that I included myself in the book. It's a story about her story, but it's also about the writer who discovers it, right? So I think I wanted to be open to the reader and to sort of try to show myself in a sense that I felt that the other authors weren't. I experienced them concealing lots of things. So I wanted to keep my own method and my own motifs for writing this in the open, and simultaneously investigating why I wanted to do it. But I suppose one reason was I think I always write about what scares me, and also my very reason for writing in the first place is probably that growing up I was very afraid of life and very afraid of all the possibilities of pain and loss that I realized life would hold for me. And those things are the very things that happened to Margarete on the island, you could say. And I suppose that was one reason. And also mirroring myself. I mean, I had written quite a few books at the time, and I also had 2 very young children. I had them in quite short succession. I was very exhausted, a new mother of 3, and there was something about mirroring my own life and my own isolation in hers on this deserted island outside of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Jel trebam prevoditi na hrvatski? Ne treba. Dobro. Another female character that's so interesting in this book is Margareta Margareta
Yes.
Navarska. Dakle, taj lik mi je isto jako fascinantan. I felt like that you were also inspired to construct her character.
Absolutely, yeah. She was so interesting because she was the most powerful woman in Europe at the time. She was the sister, as I said, of the king François I, and she even had a prince title. So she was a prince, and there was something very enticing in that for me, I think, imagining this queen who was also a prince. And she was an author, and she had all these literary salons together with other writers who needed her protection. She was a great patron of the arts and of literature. So all these writers like Rabelais, for instance, they needed her protection and they needed her financial funding, but they would at the same time really look down upon her writing and call her a dabbler, an amateur. And I think that is something, that was one of the things that really fascinated me, seeing how, I'm not 100% certain about this, but I think even if you would look her up on Wikipedia, there is still this notion of her being a bad writer, which was what they would tell her all those hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And when you do read her, she's very interesting and very fascinating. And now I know that right now in Sweden there is a translator and a literature professor who is translating this work of hers that I have used, which is Heptameron, the collection of stories, where the story of Marguerite de la Roque is named Tale 67, the 67th tale. And there was just so many, she did also write something that I just mentioned quite briefly in this book, which is a poem called Le Miroir de l'âme pécheresse, The Mirror of the Sinful Soul. It's a 1,300 line long poem. So it's a super long poem, which is a meditation on loss. She has lost her son. I can't quite remember whether it's 1 baby boy or 2, but she has lost a child, and she turns to God in order to scrutinize herself, maybe. And this is at a time when this is not really allowed. And this whole story of Marguerite de la Roque is also filled with these questions of the pre-Huguenot era, what is allowed and not allowed in our relationship to God. Margarete Navarskoj stated at the end that she, Margarete Navarskoj, everyone is named Margarete as well during this period, but Margarete Navarskoj said that what saved her on this island was her ability to talk to God and to read her Bible. She had this very tiny chignon Bible that the Huguenots would use and hide in their chignon, their hairband. And Margarete Navarskoj also did this act of turning to God with your own words instead of the sacraments of Catholicism, right? So this is a forbidden act, so to speak. And the poem that she wrote was later translated by the Princess Elizabeth of the royal court in London when she was exiled from court after, and this is also something that is really fitting in this story. The young princess, I think she's 11 years old at the time, she's been approached by a man of the court who in some way harasses her sexually, which makes her the person who needs to leave court, right? So her father, is it Henry VIII, the one who kills all his wives? Yeah. Henry VIII, he expels her from his home. And during this time, she, of course, has a tutor, and I mean, she lives, I suppose, quite well. She translates this long, long poem by Margarete Navarskoj. And that in itself is such an interesting literary endeavor, since she changes wherever Marguerite would say, I, Marguerite, she changes it into I, Elizabeth. So she's not just being a translator, but she's also really inhabiting this voice, right?
So this experience is only transferring to new generations. That's why we feel the story, you know, we can connect with it in a way.
Yes, yes. And the way that the princess translated the poem is also, it's so heartbreaking because she's doing it by hand, and it's this very, very perfect young girl's handwriting, you know, perfectly stylized. And then she embroids this cover for the poem, and she gives it to Catherine Parr, who is at the time married to her father, as a sort of consolation gift in order to get back into the warmth of the royal court. And this poem later becomes central for Reformation, the way I understood it. It sort of moves between different courts of Europe. And that is just, I mean, this story is maybe 2 paragraphs or so in my book. It's quite, I mean, I wrote it about 8 years ago, so I don't remember everything about it. But it's just like an example of one little thing about Margarete Navarskoj that I discovered researching this. So it's really like testament to the richness of history, I suppose, and
rewriting history in a way.
Yes, and how there are so many things that we, and when I say we, I mean we as ordinary readers and writers, because I really approached this whole project as an amateur myself. I felt quite inspired by how they would call Margarete Navarskoj an amateur. And I realized that I too was an amateur, and I didn't have any ambition to approach it in a scholarly manner. I just wanted to be this ordinary contemporary person trying to discover something out of history.
But you really, I just see these scientific techniques in approaching your material. You're really serious in it.
Yes, I was serious. It was as if it was a matter of life and death for me, in a sense, I believe. It was truly something, I mean, the same way that Margarete Navarskoj said that reading her little Bible saved her on this island, I felt that reading about her saved me on that imaginary island that I was on.
Lana, now it's been some time, you finished the book. Can you tell us about your impressions? Did you first read the book and then translated it, or so was it different as a reader or translator? Where is like, what's position of a reader and what is the position of a translator?
Well, the reader is much faster, so you get through the book faster as a reader, and as a translator, you really stay in every sentence much longer, so you imagine every detail. I did read the book first, and then I started translating it, and it was in winter time. Uh, so I was at home, it was warm, and it was cold outside, and I could feel the pain of your isolation and of her isolation. It was, as Karolina said, she really put herself out there, and she was very open about her own experience and her feelings. So it was really intimate in a way. I saw her the first time today, but I feel like I know her so well because she let us, every one of us, so deep into her world and her thoughts. And I was in your head for like 2 months every day. So that was a nice experience because normally authors don't do that to that extent. I mean, it's usually I translate fiction, like just pure fiction, and then you have the characters with which you connect. But now it was a real woman, so that was interesting for me. And at the same time, there was all of the Margaretes and their stories, the very, very scary story of what happened to Marguerite, that was frightening, and that made me feel grateful to be inside with warm water, food, and everything else that we have, and being able to read, to write, just to feel grateful that I don't live on a deserted island alone in the 16th century.
Yes.
Yeah, so that
With
was...
all these wild animals.
With the wild animals, yeah. It made my problems seem much smaller. Like, I don't
Any
have to
problem,
face bears. Yeah, so that was...
The whole of the novel is based on investigation, research. Did you have to do some of it?
Yes.
While
And it
translating?
was really nice. I did a lot of research. So Karolina describes her travels while she was looking for sources and visiting festivals and taking photographs of places that Marguerite has visited. So it's really nice to have Google Maps to be able to literally see where they went in the castle of Roberval, and to see the old castle where they lived. So I did a lot of geographical research, and I had a folder where I saved all of those pictures so that I can imagine and see the literal places where the story is happening. I also found it interesting in Paris, like how she had to remove architectural layers or historical layers, because she was looking for the medieval Paris of Marguerite, but then like time happened, buildings happened, and it's not the same. So that was an interesting part of the research. And Margareti Navarskoj, I wanted to use a translation of her book, but it didn't quite fit. It wasn't
The facts?
Yeah.
So there existed a Croatian translation?
There's a Croatian translation, but just the quote that Ivana read is so different that it could not be, it wouldn't make sense to have it in your book. So I had to make my own, I translated her words from Swedish so that it would be the text that you read and that you had a reaction to. So
and I know other translators had this same problem, and it's really interesting because it sort of conveys, the freedoms that translators used to take in the old days. I think that the Swedish translation of Heptameron that is coming out now will probably be very different from the one that I used. That was from the early 20th century.
Mine was quite new. I think it's from a couple of years ago, but just this quote was the most problematic one, because here it says that you don't hear
Exactly. Yes.
you don't hear about a lot of good deeds that women do, and in our translation, Simoneau, or what's his name,
Simoneau.
says that you often do hear about good deeds that women do. So it was not a good
Completely
fit.
different.
Yeah,
Yes.
completely. It was the opposite. So that's all. That was my research.
This novel depicts three narrative lines. One is a kind of attempt to reconstruct the story of Marguerite de la Roque. The other is an essay on writing. And the third one is a female experience. So my impression is that it's so organic, switching from one line to another. It's intertwined in a beautiful manner. Was it difficult for you to write it that way? Like to combine all of them together and just have the perfect rhythm, the perfect construction of your text?
The way I remember it, it wasn't really difficult to write it, but still I had so much hesitation and so much resistance, as with everything. Every time I write, I just keep questioning myself all the while. And in this case, I knew from the very beginning, I knew that I wanted to write it in this way. I think the form was very much inspired by the lack of knowledge of women's history, that I really wanted to portray Marguerite on the island only using these very few tiny shards of information that there really are, and building from them. So therefore, her part is quite limited. And after having maybe come through, well, to the middle or somewhere in the midst of writing, I went to this festival, and I think I was listening to an interview with the poet and Nobel laureate Louise Glück, who just passed away, and she was saying something about, and I wasn't in the audience because I was going from one stage to another, so I could just hear her talking, and she was saying something about how being a poet is like having a treasure map, and to be digging beside the X that marks the treasure. And so I just stopped to think, oh, so is this what I'm doing now? And in a sense, I wasn't very pleased with that thought, even though she had spoken about it in a brilliant way. I thought, oh, maybe I should have written, a Hilary Mantel novel about this. I should have written a proper historical novel. I shouldn't have put myself in it. I should just have imagined the life of Marguerite de la Roque. And so I got very hesitant. And then actually, I remember trying to do that for a quick, for just a short while. I just sat down and, okay, so what would that be like? And then I just realized that it was just a detour in the whole process, because I do think that there's always these obstacles when you write. You always make up obstacles. If you don't have any obstacles, you will make them up, and sort of, because I think writing is so much about resistance. There's always a duality, like a dual movement, like wanting to write and not wanting to write. I think it's Hélène Sixou who said that the only books that are really worth writing are the ones that we feel that we don't dare to write, and that we don't have the capacity or the strength to write, maybe. And I feel that way every time, and every time I write a book, I get caught up in this sort of neurosis, thinking, well, let's just forget about all of this. And it does not really matter how well it goes. It can feel quite easy. And then I just reach this sort of huge bump on the road, and I'm like a goldfish in that sense. I can never remember that this is something that happens to me every time. So someone else needs to tell me that. Like I need to go to someone, an editor or a publisher or my husband, and just complain about the situation, and they will tell me, well, you said this with the last book as well. So, yeah.
Do you feel that the writing controls you or uses you for creating something, or you are the one who is in control of the writing?
Well, when I think about living, I always think that, when I think about talking, being together in a room with other people, I always think that, this is a situation that I cannot control, and I wish I was writing. When I write, I can control everything, and when I write, I have my true voice. Like this is another voice, and I don't really recognize it.
But it controls you. It leads you the way it wants.
Yeah.
You wanted to write a screenplay for a movie, Then you wanted to write a history novel, It didn't go that way.
No, exactly. So the thing is that I have this illusion where anytime I'm not writing, I have an illusion of myself being able to control the writing. But when I'm actually writing, it's always just sitting in the back seat, and not maybe in the very beginning. It is of course a matter of trying to build something, but once the text sort of comes to life, then there's nothing I can do, and there's usually lots of things that I don't really plan on having in the book, but I cannot do a lot about it.
I want to read this quote from the book about the writing. Dakle, pisanje je ovisnost. Toliko sam puta pročitala tu rečenicu, no tek je sad shvaćam. Ono je bilo izlaz iz svake krize, kako velike, tako i male. Mamilo me da odkoraknem svaki put kad bih naišla na poteškoću, tako da je nikad ne bih morala riješiti, već se samo predati tekstu. Moje je postojanje ovisilo na jarkoj, bijeloj svjetlosti koja se može podići iz stranice. No i o saznanju da nikad ne moram sudjelovati, da ne moram egzistirati pod istim groznim uvjetima kao svi drugi ljudi, jer mi, dok god imamo pisanje, nitko drugi nikad neće trebati u životu. Dakle, this quote is about this writing as an escape from the real life, like your sanctuary.
Yes, and prison.
At the same time. How much your female experience, especially as a mother of 3 kids, influenced your writing? I'm sure it influenced a lot. And your career?
Yes, I suppose. When I was young, I knew from a very early age. I learned to read quite early. I think I was 4 years old when I started to read. And I quite early on realized that I wanted to be able to write books myself, and I think I somehow thought that this would be hard. I remember getting this statue of August Strindberg from some family friend, and it's this very ugly piece of it's just his face, and you can see it in bookshops in Sweden sometimes, and I didn't really like it, but it was sort of a reminder of, okay, so the writer person is an old man, and it's someone who needs to be a huge genius, I suppose. So I think I struggled a little bit with being a young girl wanting to be a writer. And also, the book that I wrote before The Bear Woman was an essay on writing, and it's a lot about trying to find my way, I suppose, and also has a lot to do with these artist stereotypes that we grow up with. I think I had an idea that maybe a woman could be a good writer, but probably she couldn't also be a mother. And so when I started writing The Bear Woman, I had just married a man that I loved, which was something that I had never really anticipated to do. And I had had my second and my third child, as I said, in a very
short period.
Yes, short period of time. So I was afraid of I was afraid of all the possibilities of loss that lies within starting up a family, but I was also afraid of losing my writing. And what happened was really, because in Sweden we have this very generous parental leave system, right? And this was also during a period of time when I think I had written 3 novels or so, and I was really struggling working also as a cultural journalist, and I was also an editor of a cultural journal, and I had lots of work. And all I wanted to do was really to write novels. But what happened was that the parental leave system enabled me to actually write, because I did get this great allowance, and my children turned out to be these very easygoing babies who would just lay beside my desk when I would write. So it ended up actually being what made possible for me to be a writer. But then again, I was really also very affected by feminist discourse in Sweden. Now, when I wrote this, I was a bit tired of the idea of the female experience, and at the same time realizing that the experience of mothering and giving birth and motherhood is really truly existential, right? It's not only something to do with women, because everyone has once been born. So it's about being a human being, not really about being a woman. And there was something about this motherhood experience that really, really inspired me in also, I think, in how writing has so much to do with the physical and the body and the senses, like experiencing everything with your senses, and writing, taking in the text, consuming it, and also wanting the reader to consume it with her body in a sense. So again, there was this dual action in a sense. I was both very very consumed with thoughts of female experience and also hesitant.
But we cannot ignore it.
No.
Because it's very strong and existential, as you said. Lana, what do you think about it? Did you connect with this female experience of the author in the book?
In a way, but no. I did not connect with any, personally, with any of the female leads, because my life is so much easier than Margarete de la Roque's. I mean, she was stranded on an island, and I couldn't. I just couldn't. I could empathize with her and feel really, really sorry for her, but I could not think of us as people who experienced the same things, because she had such a tough time.
What about the character of the author?
The character of the author, I mean, we're literally from the same time, so that was much easier. It was a closer female lead, but different experiences, I would also say. A woman who lives traveling, exploring what she wants to explore. She had an idea and she went to explore it. It's not really something I can do. So that was
different.
That was different. Yes, I enjoyed her doing it, but it was not something that I can imagine myself doing right now in my current life. To follow something and write about it. But it was nice to be let in into that world. I enjoyed traveling with her, so That was nice. And with Margareti Navarskoj, she was also from the 16th century. I mean, I can feel their pain, but I know that I have it so much better with everything that is possible in my life, with me being able to go to school from a young age and to have access to not only to education but to all the benefits that we have
The modern society.
now. Yeah, so.
And I think for me, just briefly, I think that at the end, once I had actually written the book, I felt very connected. And I mean, this is also something very, a very double-edged thing with writing. I mean, writing is really solitude. It's a very solitary act, just like reading. But then what it does is that it really puts you in contact with all these other people,
others' experiences.
Yes, and the minds of others. So you can be quite lonely, and then at the same time just
connect with others.
Just through this kind of transgression, you can just move into another person. And once I was finished, I also felt very very close to these women of the past, really.
Translating is also pretty solitary because you sit with your book and do the work. But I also imagined like would I had survived on a stranded island if I was stranded on an island. I really don't know. I mean, I can't even imagine how that must have felt like, and
How did she survive? Oh my
how
God.
did she survive?
I don't get that.
You would have
I
to
don't
have
think
a
I'd
tiny,
survive,
tiny book
actually.
to read.
With one book, I really don't think that I'd survive.
There's also one quote, because I'm wondering this about this female experience, and there's this quote that's really like ringing a bell for me. Uglavnom izbjegavam biografske tekstove, možda i previše, vjerojatno zato što imam osjećaj da me prati sumnja da ta vrsta teksta pogađa književnice na drugi način nego književnike. Zato što se smatra da muškarci pišu onom što je opće važeće, dok žene pišu samo o sebi. Like you were hesitant to write about a female experience because it's thought that only women write about themselves and the men write only about something that is important. But should we say it's also determined by culture? Because men in culture are not allowed to express their emotions. They have to always, but women are. Could we relate this with that?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, writing it's such an emotional endeavor, right? You really use your emotional self while you write, and you really use like your inner world and your subconscious and all these things. So yes, and of course, I mean, violence against women is this very, it's a big subject for the book, and this is also something that is still prevalent around us.
Yes, unfortunately. You said that you grew up in the post-feminist Sweden. What does it mean?
It means,
what is your opinion on feminism today?
Well, it means that, I grew up in a time where we were told that all of the battles had been won, and they were won by our mothers and grandmothers and the women before them. And this is, of course, very true. But there was still a feeling. I remember when I started writing, as I said, I felt very conflicted about the idea that a writer had to be a man, a male genius. And when I started working as a music critic for the main Swedish daily, there were 20 critics at this newspaper, and
Only
none
one.
of them were female. And this was during the 90s, right? And at the same time, we were told that feminism wasn't needed. You don't need to have these boring feminist discussions because you already have
acquired.
everything. The rights are all acquired. And I think that made it even the more interesting maybe, because we had to always ask ourselves, you know, why
Yes.
do we need this, and what is it like to be a human being? And I think that was probably the main question for the feminists. I wouldn't say maybe feminists of my generation, but I would say for me, like, what is it to be a woman but still consider yourself a human being and consider your books or your writing to be equally important. Yeah.
As writings of male authors.
Mm-hmm.
When you finished the book, did your obsession with Margareti Navarskoj
Diminish? It didn't really. I would still think about her. Nowadays, I don't think about her that often, but I mean, I have been thinking about her being here in Croatia now with the translation. But I did go on thinking a lot about Margareti Navarskoj and about the Princess Elizabeth and her translation. And I do know that they have the poem in Oxford in the library. So once I get time, I'll go there and see it for myself, I suppose.
So it's a never-ending obsession or passion, whatever.
Yes.
Because the story is very interesting. That's why I mentioned the second character, because I think she's very interesting, the Queen, Margaret, too. Thank you, Karolina, for your talk. Thank you, Lana,
Thank you.
for
Thank
yours
you.
too. Hvala svima što ste došli. Ako imate koje pitanje za autoricu, i naravno možete kupiti knjigu i doći da se autorica potpiše. Imate koje pitanje? Dobro. Eto, sad vas prepuštam da upoznate se s autoricom i da se družimo svi zajedno. Hvala.